we are very happy that Joe Schwartzberg is joining us today, and I imagine he'll join every month that he's able to join. So rather than me explaining the book, or actually my original plan was to show an 8-minute video that was of Joe speaking about his book, but now we have the live thing here, so that's wonderful. So most of you know Joe very well, but a few of you do not. So I'm going to read just a little brief bio of his life, and then open it up to Joe to share whatever he'd like to as we begin the book club. So after obtaining his PhD in geography from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Joe taught at the University of Pennsylvania, 1960 to 64, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, India, 79 to 80, and the University of Minnesota from 1964 to 2000. A prolific author, his academic specialties were in South Asia, political geography, and the history of cartography. In 2009, he was awarded the title Distinguished International Professor Emeritus at the University of Minnesota. A lifelong peace and justice activist, Joe has served in leadership roles in many organizations, especially in those related to world federalism. He was one of the founders in 1995 of the Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers, which now consists of about 80 peace and justice organizations. Following his formal retirement from the University of Minnesota in 2000, Joe focused more heavily on issues of global governance, with the book that we will be studying in the book club, his final opus. Joe is the founder of the Workable World Trust and is now Director Emeritus of the Trust. And I have the honor to work together with Joe daily to promote proposals for UN transformation on many levels. You can go to our website, which is workableworld.org, to learn more about Joe's lifetime and also about the various activities that the Trust is engaged in. And I will add to that that Joe just turned 90 years old on February 5th, but is still chugging along day after day, accomplishing so many things that I try my best to keep up with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe. And Joe, I don't know if Louise is there. You'll need to mute. Well, here, can I unmute you? I think I can. Unmute.
Could I suggest that Joe tilts his screen forward a little bit so we can see his whole face?
Yeah, and Louise, since you're there, you should be able to unmute and there. There, you're unmuted and we can see you, Joe. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking Nancy and Tom Hastings and everyone else who was responsible for making this event possible, and also all those in attendance, some of whom are known, most of whom are known to me, but several of whom are new acquaintances. So thank you all for being here. Nancy suggested that I begin by telling you a little about the book. One of the most important things that the Trust has done, I would say the most important thing that the Trust has done, is to have the book translated into Arabic, Chinese, French, German, Japanese, Russian, and Spanish. And we have the Spanish translator, Florencio Gore, on this call. The reason I think that's so important is because it makes it possible for the first time to have a global conversation where we're all more or less on the same page. That's going to take a lot of work, but I think it's doable. And Florencio will be helping with that task. Just as we're having our first such conversation about the way the world is governed here on our screen today, we hope to have duplicate conversations in all 8 language areas that we're talking about, the ones that I've just mentioned. So that would be a historic first if it happens, but we'll do our best to make it happen. The other thing I thought it would be useful to share with you is my thoughts on why I chose the title of the book that I did and wrote the book that I did. The title is Transforming the United Nations System, Designs for a Workable World. Let's break that down into 4 parts. The first part is transforming. I purposely don't use the overworked word reforming, because what people call reforming the United Nations is mostly tweaking with the organization in its present charter, as it's constituted under the present charter. Our job is not only to not merely to reform, but to transform the organization. So reform might be, say, adding 2 or 3 seats to the Security Council, maybe 4 of the G4 proposals from Germany, Japan, Brazil, and India are taken. But to have a completely different way of organizing the Security Council so that there's no veto, and that's one chapter in the book. There are many other reforms, mostly concerning the question of decision making. So it will be really a revolutionary set of changes, which I'm recommending. And there isn't enough discussion of what those changes might be in the global governance community among academics or diplomats. The second part of the title is United Nations System. Most people, when they talk about the UN, they think of the 6 primary organs of the UN whose duties are specified in the charter of the organization. Well, the UN is actually much more than that. It's got a whole bunch of affiliated agencies, like the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and so on, about 23 of them, and special funds, like funds on population, or the World Food Program, special funds, and it has global compacts with corporations, which is a relatively new aspect of the system. So it's a much more elaborate system than most people are aware of, and and parts of the system are at odds with other parts of the system. It's not a coherently organized system. So the question is how to bring coherence and order to that, and also how to make the system capable of enacting binding resolutions that have the force of law, which is not the case now. The United Nations presently is just a bunch of states that try to get along, but often are unsuccessful in doing that. So that's the second part of the title. And then designs for a workable world. Designs is the premise on which the book is based is that the design of decision-making agencies has a lot to do with the legitimacy of the agency in question and the efficacy of the decisions that they reach. So right now, the decisions are not binding, and they're often ignored when it suits a country to do so because of the problem of sovereignty. No one is going to tell country X, Y, or Z that they must follow the decisions of a body of organizations, which they had no role in creating. So the idea that without a voice, you will not regard the decisions that you're asked to obey as legitimate. So when in our own country, when the Republic was founded, we specified no taxation without representation. Well, that's the way it is now, and we need a voice for people all over the world, and they don't have a voice. That's one of the chapters in the book is on a United Nations or World Parliamentary Assembly, so that people finally have a voice in the decisions that will govern their lives as they should. And finally, Workable World. I've given, in the course of a rather long lifetime, literally hundreds of talks on the United Nations system or global governance. And I find that when I talk about world government, even though I believe in it staunchly, when I talk about world government, people say, oh, it's a nice idea, but of course it's utopian, it'll never happen. And it's very difficult to engage people in support for world government because they're convinced that it's an impossible dream. Well, I make clear that I don't hold that view, but I say, even if you don't believe that in world government, you still do believe in a workable world. We're all going down the same path. I might be going a little further than you are, but as long as we're going down the same path, why don't we work together for a world that is at the very minimum workable? By workable, I mean that it's just, that it strives to be just, that it strives to be lawful and largely succeeds, and that perpetrators of international crimes are individually responsible, that no one is above the law, as the United States government officials in the UN have tended to regard the United States, and that it will offer hope for a better future for people living today, for the next generation and the generation after that. In other words, that it's on a trajectory of improvement. So that's what I would regard as a workable world. And I think that's a slogan that could engage the ardent support of a great many people. And that's what the book strives to do. And you'll see exactly how during the course of this book club and in the months ahead. So thank you for participating. And I'm going to stay engaged in this conversation until its end. So perhaps you'll hear from me again before we close up. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Joe, very much. So just the other things I wanted to say about the book club. I don't think Joe mentioned the study guide, but I think all of you have access to the study guide, and actually that has also been translated into all the other 7 languages. So again, it provides a method for us to really get the message out. Not everyone immediately connects with the idea of reading a close to 400-page book that is talking about UN systemic reform. And, you know, just this last week in Mexico City, there was a Model UN conference that the Workable World Trust partly sponsored, and they were talking about weighted voting in the General Assembly. It sounds phenomenal, mostly because the people that were running it are really phenomenal. And I'll be sharing information with all of you about how that went. But I think, you know, one purpose of this book club is not only for ourselves individually to have this nice edifying opportunity to talk about these big ideas, and hopefully think about how we as individuals can have some impact, but also putting our heads together about how can we communicate these messages to others in our own lives with the connections we have, but also, you know, there are many other ways, like Model UN programs in the high schools, in college classes, you know, even in our community groups like Great Decisions and those types of groups. So it's kind of an experimental group here too. I'll be creating some short handouts and ask for your input on that. We may think about, you know, what would be some good video products and what would be some scripts that would be appropriate for that, etc. So please be thinking not only about what you're learning, but how would others that you know engage with those same ideas. So with that, oh, I did want to put up one quote too. I'm going to try out my share screen and sharing my desktop. And then over here, well, there's the book, but I wanted to share this one quote that's in Joe's book. He said, "I make no claim that any of the institutional designs put forward in this book are the only ones capable of promoting the objectives they address, and I recognize that many competing proposals have already been advanced. Other worthy proposals will surely be forthcoming, each with its own pros and cons and likely costs and benefits. And nothing would please me more than to have my own formulations inspire others to advance alternative recommendations and have the merits of their respective ideas seriously debated." So, you know, the book, the frame of the book, I mean, each chapter is such an important topic. And of course, there have been some who have made proposals, some in this room, in this group, may have their own ideas about things. So I feel like each chapter is a kickoff. We will be reviewing the proposals in this book. And by the way, we go by the acronym TONS, Transforming the United Nations System. So if I ever say TONS, that's what I'm referring to. But, you know, so with each topic, it's a chance for us to start with the foundation of what is in Joe's book, but then really branch out from there and bring up whatever kind of ideas and proposals we may have. Okay, so I am going to start out and stop talking so much so soon. For any of you that had time to look at what I sent later yesterday, I'm sorry about the lateness, but I thought we could focus on these 4 sections of the, you know, the many things that were covered, even in just the preface and a fairly short chapter 1. There's a lot of ideas in there. But and in the study guide, of course, we present all sorts of questions that could be discussed in a group. But I decided to pick out a few here. I am going to, if the 2 chapters, if Manhattan Beach and Cincinnati could unmute and just let me know, are you planning to stay on for the whole time? Or are you planning to exit in about, you know, 15, 20 minutes? Or maybe you don't know yet.
I can't wait.
I think we'll stay.
That was Cincinnati?
Yes.
Okay. And how about Tom and the gang in Manhattan Beach? We're not hearing you, Tom. Maybe they're having a powwow about what they're doing. Tom? All right, well, we're going to keep going. You know, obviously anyone at any time can get off the call if you need to, and those meeting 2 or more together, feel free, and this is true for all the months, to exit when you wish and have your own local discussions. This month, Tom Hastings and I put so much work into preparing the technology for this, but in the future we may be able to present, you know, let you know a little bit more of the topics, and you know, you can be prepared for that and maybe think about what can the local chapters do instead of staying on the whole time. I think there's a lot of value in the local discussions. So I thought we would start, and I know some of you are on phone only. I definitely need to read everything I've got on the screen here. The book starts out in the preface. Joe talks about, you know, I added the words fundamentals here. 6 fundamental principles that the book is based on. Joe mentioned to me the other day, there are probably other principles as well, but these are some pretty core ones. So I'll read through these summaries of each of them, and then we've got a couple questions, and I'm just going to open it up to everyone. And I'll read this and then exit my screen share so I can see everyone again. And please unmute yourself when you want to speak, and if you can't, those of you on video, raise your hand so I can call on you if, you know, if you're not being heard. So 6 fundamental principles. Number 1, the rule of law. The force of just law must supplant the law of force. Number 2, global interdependence. Our planet is an interdependent organism. What nations do on their own territory often affects other nations seriously, either for better or for worse. Nature respects no boundaries. Number 3, global solutions. Global problems require global solutions. Number 4, implications of sovereignty. National sovereignty implies not only national rights, but also national responsibilities. And we'll be talking more about that aspect of sovereignty later, so we maybe won't focus on that so much during this initial session. Well, what I mean by that is the next 15 minutes before we switch to the next slide. Principle number 5, human rights. All humans are entitled to political, civil, economic, and social rights as expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the last one, responsibility to protect. When nations fail to protect the rights of their citizens, the international community has the responsibility to do so. So the questions I have listed here, and I'm going to read both of them now so we can kind of have it open the floor to responding to either one of them. Number one is, for each of these principles, do you agree or disagree? And why do you believe as you do? And secondly, are any of these principles potentially dangerous? If you think so, why is that? So I could leave these up on the screen, or I could stop share. I think I prefer stop share so I can see all of you again. If you want me to bring those up again, I could do that. So at this point, well, in fact, well, if I unmute everybody, we might get a lot of background noise. So if you could please unmute yourself when you have something to share, that would be great.
This is Ron Glossop speaking.
Hi, Ron.
I wanted to mention that in connection with the principle of the implications of sovereignty, it seems to me that there's that political aspect for sure, what the national governments can do, but there's also the spirit or feeling of nationalism, the way that people identify themselves first with their nation state and only secondarily as a member of the planetary community. In fact, I think this is still the case. If you ask somebody, what are you? Well, I'm an American, or I'm a German, or I'm a Chinese. And I think that that is an essential part of the problem for us to move forward.
And Ron, while you're speaking, I'm going to mention that Hans Hermann from Germany is a proponent of Esperanto. So I don't know if you heard. Yeah, so he's on our call today, and I'm not sure you know each other.
No, I don't know him. So, but let me say a couple of words in Esperanto. Mi joyas que vi estes sur la telefon voco con mi, kai mi esperas que vi sendos retmesajon al mi. Mia retadreso estes la sama kio mia nomo ro, Glossop che mindspring.com. Ankon.
I think Ron just shared his email address. I caught the mainspring. Did that make sense to you, Hans Hermann? I think you're muted, but. Yeah, is there a way to unmute just him? Let's see.
Kaj mi volonte sendas al vi retmesaĝon.
Bonus.
Wonderful. Okay, great. I believe, Larry, you were raising your hand?
Yes, thank you. I did an interesting experiment last week. I read a lot of news. I see the people referring to the need for global responses, international responses, so forth. And so I Googled in parentheses the words requires a global response. And the screen lights up with literally, you'll get thousands of references to those exact words in all kinds of disciplines, in science, in politics, in health, in environment, in, I mean, almost every domain, you'll find those words being written by people all over the world saying, using that particular notation, requires a global response. It is phenomenal how much that thinking is permeating the literature of the day.
Karen?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I saw your phone box light up, but maybe that just seems to happen every so often. Did you have something you wanted to add or not at the moment?
No, but I see a phone coming on the screen a lot, and I think someone's trying to reach me.
Oh, I see. And then your name box comes up here.
But maybe that's not the case. I don't know.
Anyone else want to add about any of the 6 principles?
Yes.
Hi, Cincinnati. I guess
Yes, I think
Other
it's. I think it's very important that we need global solutions. We need decision making that's more democratic and takes into consideration people who are poor and do not have their basic human rights. And more leaders in our own country need to recognize that the situation in our world requires that we change, that the status quo is not satisfactory, that the human rights in our world are woefully not what they should be.
Yes, well, and I would add that not only our leaders need to know that, the citizens of America themselves somehow voted in who's in the various offices. And I think, you know, Workable World Trust had a table at the Democracy Convention that was held in Minneapolis in August this year. And we didn't get much attention to the global democracy message because everyone was so focused on domestic issues. And that's understandable because we've got some pretty serious domestic issues in America right now. But I think very few people are thinking about, you know, their global citizenship first. As Ron was saying, you know, they think about their national citizenship first.
David Lionel.
Hi, David.
Hi. I thought the last principle was very good, responsibility to protect, but I think we saw a terrible abuse of it, specifically in Libya, and it has really tarnished that concept that it was used as a cover for regime change, and the situation in Libya has deteriorated drastically as a result of that. And so I don't know where that goes, but I think it's an issue about somehow the international community has to actually represent the concerns of ordinary citizens if there's going to be a movement of responsibility to protect. That somehow we need a protection from the responsibility to protect principle being misused as it was there. And I think even a couple other instances, each time it's been a major power intervention that has not worked out well and hasn't protected anybody, and in fact made the situation drastically worse in Libya. More people died.
Joe, I know you've talked to me about this topic before. Would you like to share your thoughts on R2P?
Yes, David makes Lionel. David makes an important point, but the fault is not with the principle. The fault is with the United States' abuse of the principle. The United States used that as a fig leaf to impose a policy it would have used even without it, and they were joined by France in particular. And so there's nothing wrong with the principle as stated, as written. It's the decision to adopt a policy under the guise of the principle to protect. So there ought to be some way to say that that all actions of a military nature be approved ad hoc by a responsible body created within the United Nations Security Council itself, or outside the Security Council, but it has to be vetted, and this didn't happen. So it was just when you have a new idea and try to implement it, mistakes are to be expected. People didn't anticipate what the United States arbitrarily did, and so the fault is with the United States and France and other powers that went along with that decision, rather than with the principle itself. people confuse the two.
Very good. Thank you. I agree with
Pat, Pat, in Elton, I see that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's about time that people realize that we need global solutions to these problems. And I think like in the climate change is one area that people are realizing this. And I think we might be getting to the point where it is more prevalent view that we need global solutions to global problems. The other thing is the terrorism, that the people from other countries are coming, and there's a backlash in this country to be more isolationist, but at the same time, I think those people are responding to are reacting to the responsibility that the United States has taken in military force. And it's a shift we definitely need to go from military force to the force of law, the rule of law instead, and go toward the international court rather than the United States arbitrarily going into countries unilaterally. That I think even the isolationists would agree that there needs to be other countries that take responsibility for terrorism in their countries or in their areas of the world.
Thank you, Pat. I just want to mention, Elton, Minnesota is near the Iowa border. I don't know the size of the town. It's fairly small, I assume.
Yes,
And
it's very tiny.
you're enough hours away from the Twin Cities that you're not able to participate in many activities going on up there. So the fact that this book club, we can hear you perfectly clearly, and what wonderful comments you have to share. So this is right there, shows the value of this electronic book club that we have going on.
Yeah, we first became involved with the World Federalists in Chicago years ago. My husband and I lived in the Chicago area.
Did you know Evan?
No.
Okay, Evan's in Chicago now, so
you might ask everybody to mute themselves, Nancy, when they are not actually speaking.
yeah, well, I heard some breathing there, so I'm thinking people who have the phone up to their mouth and nose might need to flip it too, because I think people on the phone, I don't know if they can mute themselves or not. Depends on what kind of phone device, maybe.
Oh, no, we can do it.
You can, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Just the same thing, the *6.
Oh, *6 as usual. Okay. So I know we could continue this discussion, the whole time. I think I'll go on to the next slide. I will mention that R2P, responsibility to protect, will be a topic in an upcoming chapter. And also sovereignty is one of my other slides here. So those topics can continue. But as you can see, I think, every week we're going to feel like we just touched on things. And this is studying a book one chapter at a time. So that's sort of the indication of the depth of the book too. But I am going to share my screen again and get over here so I can read the next slide if I'm there we go. Okay, so that's this slide has a lot of words on it, but I will read. So and this chart, actually the chart isn't in the study guide either, but the content of the chart is in the study guide, not in the book. The book does refer to those in the top, I think it said 6%, the rich of the world, but in this chart we're expanding that out to the global north, or choices of the rich. Has two options. Option A, isolationism coupled with nationalism, looking only after one's own national interests and relying on military might to keep potential enemies at bay. I think that rings very true right now in the United States. Option
Yes.
patronage of poor nations, allocating a small portion of one's resources to meeting the world's needs, enough to maintain others' dependent clients, but not enough to bring about major changes. And looking at choices for the poor, the global south. Option A, fatalistically accepting the continuation of global injustice and adopting policies acceptable to the powerful, Option B, violently demanding justice with the consequent likelihood of being crushed. And both of these choices for the rich, choices for the poor, both have an option C, which is globalism, working for needed changes in our system of global governance to promote democracy and justice. And the question I have here, I'll read this and then you'll notice there, those seen a video, we got a comment from Father Ben by email, and so I've added that on into this discussion. Question is, rather than waiting for World War III or some other global catastrophe to persuade us to institute major changes in our system of governance, how can we now marshal the necessary will to generate the momentum to do so? And Father Ben had sent to Donna, and she forwarded to me, what can the participants in our webinar do about the numerous and serious global problems that we are confronting? What first step or steps are there that we can take? So the basic question here is, you know, global problems require global solutions. We've got a problem at the global solutions level in terms of our governance system. Do we have to wait for yet another global catastrophe, which could be extremely catastrophic, to wake people up and make that change? Or are there ways that we can start moving toward that? You know, and as Ben says, what are first steps? This feels so big. Is there something that we as individuals can do? So I'm going to stop my sharing here and open that topic up for discussion.
Well, Ron has a comment again, if no one else does.
Go ahead.
My comment is, it seems to me that there has been a consensus developing within Citizens for Global Solutions that the first step here for many people locally is to get other people to think of themselves as world citizens first and citizens of their country second. And we have a wonderful possibility here in this country because we have the idea of loyalty to the state government, but the loyalty to the national government overrides that. And we can still use that then as an example of what we're talking about. Well, yes, we do want what's good for our country, but what's good for the whole planet is much more important and has to take priority.
Thank you, Ron. Ben, Father Ben, go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Can you unmute, or let's see if I can unmute you. Yeah, there we go.
I think it's very important for people, especially in the United States, to realize there are such things as economic rights and solidarity rights that until we recognize that there are more than political rights and civil rights, the more we'll become conscious of the world, which is very much in a situation of great inequality. That's very much a functioning, workable world. They have huge riches while other people don't have the basic necessities. And as President Franklin Roosevelt said, it's people who don't have the basic necessities, people who don't have that are not free.
Evan, let me see if I can, I should be able to unmute.
Yeah, I got it.
Hi.
Yeah, I'd like to throw out maybe what you'd call a radical approach to the issue. And so to speak, an ontological approach to world governance. It starts with the premise that loyalty to ourselves as children of God is our first loyalty. Now, for loyalty to any other collectivity, I think we need to see ourselves as reflections in the collectivity. And that, in most cases, requires representation in some form or some concept. And this, I think, is what federalism can contribute, that there is really representation and participation at a whole series of levels in collective governance, starting at the very simple level with community, family, state, nation, and world governance. Now, obviously, things can get out of sync between the levels, and that's a huge problem. But I think that the challenge, obviously, of getting people to look at themselves as a participant at all these levels, including the governance, the global level, is a huge one, and it's always there.
I think South Bay chapter, you unmuted. Would you like to, someone there share? Tom?
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Yes.
You can't hear me?
Now, yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, when some kind of world disaster happens in the news, maybe we can write letters to our local paper and point out that having a global solution to that particular problem is a way that we need to be thinking.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. Louise is waving her hand. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Louise Pardee. I'm Joe's partner. I think I noticed that all of us are past middle age, or they're close to it. And I think there's a whole thing going on with the younger generation that we don't understand at all, and that is social media. An example is when it took place in Ferguson, Missouri. Kids, young people from Palestine were contacting them, were texting them, telling them how to protect themselves from tear gas and from the activity of the police. Now that's pretty amazing. And with the recent incident in Florida, kids all over the country are connected with that. And I think that is something that we have not begun to take into account, that how much that is going to break down the barriers between people in different parts of the world.
Thank you, Louise. Anyone else want to add? One thing, well, first of all, Donna Park in Cincinnati wasn't able to be on today, but what she said to me that she wanted to add, if she was here, was that each of us can contact our elected representatives and encourage them to support the UN. I mean, I think you're all aware that funding to the UN is, you know, in dire threat, and much of what is being funded by the US is being cut. And so that's one very practical way that we can, on a daily basis, make an impact. I'll also mention that Unit 15 of this book, so that, you know, I'm thinking we're going to break up into about 13 sections, but we'll discuss that later. But anyway, the final chapter is called Getting There. And Joe lists many various kind of tracks or ways that we can approach moving the world toward this. So that's something worth looking at as well. And we'll be discussing this, I think, probably every week. What can we do? Ron in Maine, I saw your finger wiggle. Should I unmute you here? I love this video. I can.
Can you
There
hear
you
me
go.
now?
Hi.
Hi. I consider myself a citizen of the world first and a citizen of the United States second. And it seems to me that I'm a member that we are one species, and that we should be looking out for the welfare of our species in general. And I don't feel that I have enemies anywhere in the world. I only have potential friends. And but I meet many, many people, and especially poor people who are pretty much unaware that there is a world out there. It's they're very, very remote. They've never even considered the idea that one can owe their primary allegiance to a world citizenry, as opposed to putting food on the table, worrying about the various problems that come up every day in their lives. And even thinking about national politics is remote for a huge percentage of people in the United States, and even more so in the poor countries of the world. So how do you solve that problem, and how do you move toward Joe's goal of world governance, a long-term goal? As I see it, one has to work with very young children to accomplish this goal. There's a lot of gray hair that I see on the screen in front of me, and that there should be some sort of component in elementary school education, which you might call world civics and world awareness. And that would be a starting point toward reaching the goal of world governance, a very long-term goal.
I'm going to close this section. I feel like we're maybe going too fast, but I think we'll go on to the next slide. But I wanted to mention in Joe's book on page 324, you will find an affirmation of human oneness. And some of you may have heard this before, but this is worth sharing and then discussing, I think. It reads, I am a member of the human family, a citizen of the world. The achievements of men and women throughout the ages are my heritage. My destiny is bound to that of all my fellow human beings. What we jointly create forms our bequest to future generations. May my life serve the good of my family. May our use of the earth preserve it for those yet to come. Joe wrote that a good number of years ago. It's been translated into something like 41 or so languages. It's simple and short and gets the message across, I think. So, I mean, that in itself could be a good thing to share in classrooms or wherever it might be. Flo, I might call on you for a minute, being, I believe, the youngest group here, where you see, I'm going to ask you to represent all young people in the entire generation, but anything you'd like to add in terms of where you see we're going for the future here.
Well, I was just thinking after the last intervention about my personal experience, and I think the idea of world civics at an early stage in education, it's vital, because even the way I ended up connected to any of these was by just signing up for a UN model at my high school in a small city in the interior of Argentina. And it was just out of curiosity. And I started being very, very kind of obsessed with the idea of these UN models, and especially with what I could do with this language that I was studying, that was English, that I just, you know, I realized I loved it too much, but not just to study only translation, but to actually work with the idea of connecting people and having different languages. And when I was about to graduate from high school, it was my dad. I was just going to, you know, study something as business administration. I wasn't even taking the time to think of what was my passion. And it was my dad that pointed out that all those UN models must mean something to you. So we started even doing research on what a career in international relations was, because being in the interior of a country, you really didn't get any elementary or high school education on these topics. So I just think that yeah, it's very hard for us to put this sort of seed, plant this seed in young people, if all we're teaching them in elementary school is about their national flag and about their national wars. So I think that's vital. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Larry.
I'd like to point back to what Joe's partner, what is your name?
Louise.
Louise, yes. Louise said something that is critical to understand, which is that young people all over the world are creating a community via the technology. The technology is almost overwhelming in its importance, overriding everything else. Look at what we're doing right now. This is just the edge of what's about to happen. There is a global community, and it's populated primarily by younger people, that is forming spontaneously because of the connectivity. And just as we have people in Germany and you know, other far-flung parts of the world in this conversation right now, we're just a microcosm of what is exploding across the world as smart devices get into the hands of more and more and more people. And I think what we need to do is figure out how to guide this wave rather than trying to create it, because it's being created as we speak. And I'd like to say further that this notion of America first is being soundly rejected by the rest of the world, and I think is going to be pushed back against by a majority of Americans within the next couple cycles of elections. So I'm very much wanting us to realize the importance of the technology and start looking at how we can guide it and get more connectivity established and use the connectivity amongst young people as the vehicle for us to educate about the need for institutional tools in bringing about a more peaceful world. Thanks.
Those on video, I can see you raise your hand if you want to speak. And anyone on the phone that I'm missing? Oh, Joe, I will call on you in a minute too. Anyone on the phone that wanted to speak and we haven't given you a space to do that?
Can you hear me?
I can. Is this Jean?
This is Karen.
Karen.
And I think that Tom brought up something about when things occur that are horrific, or at least get our attention, that we can make a statement at that time of maybe a possible solution. If you listen to Amy Goodman on, let's see, Democracy Now! Each day, you probably come up with at least 3 or 4 things that could be brought to the attention of our government. And if you call into, let's see, the comments line, I have the phone number, 202-456-1111. Then just give them 2 or 3 sentences and make it short. And the other thing, of course, you can do is call your representatives, and that's easy too. And I have that number, which is very easy too, the capital, and then you just go from there, 202-224-3121. So I do that quite often, and I don't know if it gets to anyone of great importance, but it gets to the person who answers the phone, and that's spreading the word a little bit.
Right.
And that's the comment.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And you mentioning phone numbers, of course, this is being recorded. I'll get the numbers down. I will be within the next week creating a book club web page as part of our Workable World website. So all the recordings of these calls will be there, but also any further resources that come out of our discussions. Any of you that want to recommend further reading on the topic we discussed, anything like that, we'll add that. So that can become a very rich resource. And hopefully, I would say anyone can jump into this book club at any time. They don't have to start from the beginning. There's no reason they have to. First of all, they can go back and watch recordings, but also I think each topic on its own, there'll be much that we'll be learning. Joe, I wanted to call on you.
Well, yes, I have several comments. People have discussed whether we should advocate for the national interest or the world interest. And I would say in discussions with those people, we want to make clear that what we do in the world's interest will normally be in the national interest as well, because ultimately we cannot detach ourselves from the rest of the world. So when we benefit others, we benefit ourselves. We also feel good in the process. The other thing I'd like to mention is that the two most powerful forces in history are inertia, which is a force which prevents movement from happening, and human will. The work in 180 degrees from one another. In other words, they're opposite. When you exercise your will, you're overcoming inertia, and vice versa. So it's very important to realize that the attitudinal resources that we bring to our conversations and our actions is very important. So one thing I point out is in talks that I give and in the book is that if you believe you can't, you can't. You're beaten at the start, and that's the problem. And that's the position of inertia. We can't do it. We're not going to move. We'll take care of number one, ourselves and our nation. On the other hand, if you believe you can, you just might. If you don't believe you can, you can't. So developing the idea that yes, solutions are possible, solutions are available. Those designs for decision making are available. That's most of the content of the book, to show that what people think we can't do, we can do, and it's really not as complicated as the naysayers would have us believe. So those the attitude that we bring to world problems is extremely important.
Thank you, Joe. Lucy, let me unmute you. There you go.
I think it might be worthwhile to have something, not exactly a competition, but a sort of race to get as many little vignette or sayings or poems or contributions that point to the unity of the world. I have one very simple one, which is I pledge allegiance to the flag of planet Earth and to the unity for which it stands, one world, indivisible, with liberty, justice, and plenty for all. You know, if we could get a whole lot of those kind of contributed by people of all ages and all corners of the world, I think that could build a bit of momentum. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Anyone else?
This is Dave Abbott. I'd like to make a comment. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, David. Yes.
Yeah, I'm in Colorado. A lot of the arguments that I've heard today are arguments that I've heard over the last 50 years about the need for global governments. One of the new factors, in addition to technology, is China. China, with an even slower or declining growth rate, by the middle of this century will have about 4 times the GDP of the United States. They will become the hegemon. India probably will be the second largest economy, and the EU, assuming they get their act together, will be the third. The US will be in 4th place. China is, their model, of course, as you know, is authoritarianism. They would call it enlightened authoritarianism, but they will clearly be in a position to dictate the kind of global governance that we have on this planet. We need to understand that, and that may help give us some motivation to promote liberal democracy as the alternative to enlightened authoritarianism.
Thank you. Larry, excuse me, Tom, are you, was that her hand raising?
There.
Tom?
No, we weren't.
Okay, I saw your hand wave. Okay, well, that was a deep thought to end this section on, David. We'll continue that discussion further. And I would appreciate it if you maybe would send some, any readings that you recommend to further that line of thought.
And Nancy, we still have one question or one comment.
Father Ben, it's the Cincinnati group speaking, right? Yeah, go ahead.
One of the questions is, are any of these principles potential? I think we have to emphasize just the opposite. Lack of observance of these principles are potentially dangerous. There's no one more dangerous than someone who has nothing to lose. And people who don't have basic necessities, don't have basic human rights, they have nothing to lose, and that's dangerous. And the same is true of groups and religions. If they feel that they have nothing to lose, that's extremely dangerous to our world.
Yeah, well, that's very much like this chart we were looking at, the choices for the poor. The second one is violently demanding justice. You know, if they don't have basic rights, there's the whole just law was the beginning principle. The force of just law must supplant the law of force. That word just is very important. Did I see someone else raising their hand? I think I want to move on, but it's okay. You know, I have 2 more slides, but we don't have time for that, clearly. I'm going to go to the last one. And here I can go. This one was talking about, you know, comparing this idea of utopia versus workability, and the question is about what systems of our current what aspects of our current global governance system should change happen first, and what are your thoughts? And that would in itself be a wonderful discussion. But I want to move on to this final slide about the sovereign equality of nations. And you saw in the study guide, Joe had written a 2-page essay on that thought, and it's certainly included in the book throughout. I just started reading, let's see. I would have to go stop share first to show you this book. Would the world be better without the UN, written by Tom Weiss. Many of you know his work, and he's written scores of books, and that's his latest one. And the reason I'm reading it is because he's coming to Minneapolis and we'll be talking, the title of his talk is exactly that book. So let me go back now to sharing my screen. So this quote next to the flags is from this book. He says, state sovereignty is the fundamental organizing principle for international relations generally, and for the United Nations particularly. Lastly, lasting and meaningful solutions to global problems are impossible when sovereigns reach decisions based on narrowly defined interests and can opt out of agreements that prove inconvenient or costly. Westphalian sovereignty is a chronic ailment for the United Nations that could be lethal for the planet. So that's a beautiful quote. I must say his book pretty much concludes that sovereignty is so entrenched that let's work on some other problems of the UN system, because that one's just so hard to change. But anyway, let me address these couple questions. And actually it's 12:15. You know, I say we're going to have about 10 minutes to discuss, and then we'll need to end and continue next time. or continue by email even. The questions I have here is, why do nations adhere so tenaciously to the outmoded Westphalian model of sovereignty? And should sovereign nations be subject to international jurisdiction and the imposition of punitive sanctions when activities within their borders have serious adverse effects on other countries? If yes, what might those sanctions be? All right, stop sharing there. So kind of some big time. We actually discussed sovereignty in a bit on this with the first slide. Any further thoughts you'd like to share? David Lionel.
Yeah, well, we already have economic sanctions, but it's quite striking that they're very partial. They come basically from the West against other nations, against Russia, against North Korea, but they never come back the other way. Nobody ever sanctions the United States or Western Europe for its actions against the global good. And so that's kind of one of the issues here, because the basic thing with national sovereignty is that it's very difficult to force a nation state to do anything that its leadership does not want to accede to. And that's been kind of, because we don't have an acceptance of the value of the whole as against the individual nation in general, it's very difficult to execute that. But as I say, there are sanctions now. They're just not universally or justly applied. And if they were, then I think we could make progress against national sovereignty. It just only partially applies and doesn't go the other way, if you will, especially against the United States.
Lucy.
Yeah, a similar macro biased organization of the world system exists as regards their weapons. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty explicitly gives the 5 permanent members of the Security Council the right to keep their nuclear weapons, and that, in a sense, is what North Korea is objecting to, the unfairness of the system. And there is an alternative treaty which has just been introduced in the last couple of years that is supposed to get everyone involved in nuclear disarmament. And if somehow the talks that we're expecting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump are going to go anywhere, that would be one perspective to have in mind. But I just want to draw attention to the fact that the UN has been set up to be inherently unfair, and that is one reason that it is unfair. Thank you.
Turn it up and I can hear it better.
I would like to add that I think sanctions have to be enforceable against individual companies. I think they have to be economic in order to affect individuals. But if there was some way to sanction trade with military companies, with tobacco companies, with sugar, oil companies, individually rather than through the government, but I don't know exactly how you would enforce that. And second thing I'd like to say is you're asking what we can do. I guess I haven't done a whole lot myself on this topic to promote it, but I would challenge everybody that's on the line to interact with some younger people, to whether it's a social study teacher in the school, or I've done a lot of work locally with our schools, or a teacher or a blog or on Facebook or any way that is technological. I think somebody suggested writing a letter to the editor. Well, I think newspapers are kind of a dinosaur now to most young people. And you have to get on blogs or Facebook. And so any way you can, I would challenge everybody to interact at least once someplace before the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Pat. Assignment from Pat for all of us. That's great. Anyone else have a comment? Joe?
I believe in the sanctions, but not in sanctioning whole countries, because all countries are populated by populations that are more or less alike. They want the same thing. They want decent lives for their kids. They want peace. They want stability, domestic tranquility, as we say in the preamble to our own Constitution. So the question is how to devise smart sanctions. So the people we should sanction are the people who have a big economic stake in the in their country, the corporations that are profiting from questionable activities. That's not all corporations by any means. And also the elite families who depend on sending their kids to elite schools, the Big Ten and the Ivy League schools in the United States, the University, Oxford, Cambridge, Paris, a handful of others in Europe. The people who are the elite, who perpetuate their elite status by their contacts with select common elite in other countries. So we have to devise sanctions that work and not sanctions that hurt ordinary citizens and give sanctions a bad name. So we haven't worked out that problem yet, but it's possible to do.
This whole idea of changing the world's thinking about national sovereignty, I mean, it just seems more and more to me that it's going to be the voices from people. And I think, the idea of creating a UN Parliamentary Assembly, that's something we'll talk about 2 sessions from now. And by the way, Andreas Bummel will be joining us from Germany. He's head of the campaign for a UN Parliamentary Assembly. He'll be our moderator that time. But I think some of the things we talked about in terms of changing the consciousness of people in our communities and, and globally to think, I mean, that is a huge barrier to the UN being effective. And there is a point where each of us has a role to play. And the more that there's a democracy and transparency, I think, within the UN system, that's how that can be really tackled. But again, this is hardly on the radar of most people, right? It's just so much the way the world works that people don't even think about it. Yeah. Now, we do need to wrap up, I think. Hans Herman and Vicky, I don't think either of you. Hans, we heard from you in Esperanto. That was very nice. But if you wanted to share anything with us in English, that would be fine. And same with Vicky. I'm just giving you an open floor, no pressure here. I see Tom Hastings wanting to share. Go ahead, Tom. You're muted. Can't hear you yet, Tom.
Unmute. Okay.
There you go. Now I hear you. Yes.
Okay. But thinking about sanctions, I've said, well, how do we do it in the United States? And the federal government is suing states. The states are suing the federal government. So that would be one way in which nation states could interact with the world government and vice versa. Also, I realized that we all pay a lot of taxes to the federal government. Are we going to have taxes to the world government too, or how does that work? That's something to think about as well, because that's a way of which control, like sanctions, it can be applied between the world government and the national governments.
Evan. Oops, you're muted here. Let me. There you go.
Yeah, I just to continue on my, you might say, realistic attack. I think that whenever we encourage interaction among people from different countries, we're making steps to world community, and that can take any number of forms. We host visitors, for example, on short-term trips to stay with us. Students are traveling the world these days and doing their semesters abroad. I think that's wonderful. And then there are other organizations such as Rotary clubs that are international in nature and have a great deal of interaction between people in different countries. And I think that gives rise to initiatives that express world community, that people see other people as real people, as with the same types of concerns that we here in the US have, maybe in a different expression, and are able to work together to achieve mutual and ultimately universal goals for the world.
Thank you, Evan. Anyone else on the phone want to say anything? Okay, it is 12:27, so 12:27 California time, various times in wherever you are. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining this time, and I encourage you to send me any input you have in terms of the content, the style of our running this meeting, technology issues you had, any suggestions for improvement, or also any thoughts you have, continuing the discussion, which we can share. I will send each of you I've been sending the messages out blind copied. I will send a message out asking if you're okay if your email address is shared with the group. Then we can actually, have email conversations as well, but I don't want to release that without your permission. As I mentioned, the book club will be having its own web page soon, so you can just go there and see the latest that's been uploaded, and you can, if you forget the date of the next session or whatever. Next month, David Otten will be our facilitator, and the following month, Andreas Bummel. And Ron Glossop's already agreed to cover the month when we cover funding and human resources, and I'll be looking for other facilitators for future groups. Next session is Saturday, April 14th. It will always be the second Saturday. So April 14th, same start time, and the topic will be Reform of the General Assembly. So with that, I really want to thank all of you. After all the nervous efforts that Tom Hastings and I made for technology testing, etc., I'm pretty pleased with how this went. So thank you very much for joining, and I'll sign off for this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Nancy and Joe, and thank you for getting us started. Big success.
Yeah. Spread the word. More can join us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Do you want to leave this meeting?